Hello once again, this is St. Patrick, coming to you live atop the hill in Auburn, Indiana. Actually, I'm atop the town square, which sometimes appears like a hill, but we are doing the Midnight Rider News Show redo episodes here, where we bring back in chronological order, that's in chronological order, the oldest episodes that we have, because on some podcatchers out there and some podcast apps, what they do is they allow us 100 episodes. And so because we are well past 100 episodes now, they knock off the one before when we add a new one. So because of that, we thought it would be a really good idea to start bringing back the older episodes. And in this one, we are up to episode 4, Hidden History with Donald Jeffries. Now, as you know, Don became a friend of the show, and it was because of this episode. I had not met Don before, so this was really my first interaction with him, which is interesting to hear now because, now we're friends. And I just published his book, Masking the Truth, and I know him very well, I think. So being able to go back to step 1 of me meeting Don in preparation for this episode is it's a real neat thing to do for me, and I hope it's a real neat thing to do for you as well. Now, Don can be very controversial, and I didn't even know that in the beginning. I just thought that Hidden History is a marvelous work. Still to this day, I believe it's a marvelous work. And that's the thing about his books is I don't quite think they're as controversial as, say, his podcast or his show. And I really don't think he's controversial at all. But the fact that society today finds him controversial, to me, says much more about society than it actually says about Don. So because of that, it's been an interesting story arc with Don over the last few years. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you back to square one. This is episode 004 of the Midnight Rider News Show with St. Patrick, Don Jeffries, and Hidden History.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no secret is revealed. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
I welcome this kind of examination.
We came
and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
A new world order. New world order.
We saw?
If suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe.
Always talk to you like they're the best. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House!
He died. He died.
But that's a wicked woman.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
You can keep it. Period. 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 They are the focus of evil in the modern world. It's a catastrophe.
Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome.
This is the Midnight Rider News Podcast. Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. I'm St. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, court historians, and textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight we have episode 004, Hidden History. Donald Jeffries, the author of the wonderful book Hidden History, will join us in a few minutes for what I'm sure will be an unconventional and unpredictable hour that will surely cause you to look differently at the way you have understood contemporary American history. But first, a little cleaning of the castle. We want to thank everyone who listened to episode 003, The Silent Coup of Richard Nixon. Lynn Kolodny of Watergate.com was an incredible guest who weaved a unique, and I believe truthful account of Watergate that put both Alexander Haig and John Dean directly in the crosshairs. If you've not listened to episode 03, you can do so at MidnightRiderNews.com in the podcast section, as well as free on iTunes. While there, you may also want to check out The Innocence of Oswald and Al Cuppet versus the New World Order, which were the first two episodes of the Midnight Rider News Show. You won't be sorry that you did. If you do listen, we would like you to do us a favor. Of course, we would like you to share the show on Facebook, but we would also like you to take a minute and email us at midnightridernews@gmail.com. Please remember that the writer is spelled W-R-I-T-E-R, as in someone who writes. We can see that the show is being downloaded worldwide, and we sincerely thank you all for that. However, we would also like to know who you are, we would like to know who you would like to hear on the show, and what you like about the show so far. We are a new show, so we do expect some growing pains, which we think are inevitable. We do hope, however, that we can improve with each episode so that we can bring you quality original programming from the alternative perspective. We would also like you to visit MidnightRiderNews.com for articles that we believe set a new standard in alternative historical analysis. We are unique in that what we do is not to copy and paste content from other sites and claim it as our own. We do not do that at all. We write each and every article on the site. We therefore may not post as much content as other sites, but we can assure you that it is our own uniquely produced content. We have recently added articles on Watergate, Waco, and Columbine, so we hope that you enjoy what we have done as much as we have enjoyed bringing it to you. We'll be right back with author Donald Jeffries. Donald Jeffries is the author of 2014's Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics, the 2016 paperback of which includes a foreword by Roger Stone. Hidden History is an outstanding anthological treatment of modern conspiracy theories, or as we call them, historical truths. He is also the author of the upcoming Survival of the Richest. Both works can be ordered via a special link on MidnightRiderNews.com. His blog, Keeping It Unreal, is also where Mr. Jeffries continues the work he did on Hidden History. So now, the Midnight Rider News Show welcomes author Donald Jeffries. Don, how are you doing this evening?
Fine, thanks for having me on.
Don, the idea of hidden history in itself assumes that the real stories of the people and events that we have all experienced have remained hidden for a number of years. Why was this information hidden originally, and why does it remain hidden to the vast majority of American society to this day?
Well, I don't think it's literally hidden, because people like me can find it. It's just that it's hidden from most of the public, because most of the public gets their information through mainstream media outlets or establishment historians. And establishment historians are just as bad as mainstream media talking heads. They're just simply not going to go against conventional wisdom, and conventional wisdom tells us that there are no such thing as conspiracy theories, and that these things are all have been explained away, years ago by the same conventional news sources and establishment historians.
When we started Midnight Rider News, Don, I hesitated, and to be honest with you, I still hesitate, to describe it as a site for what many may call conspiracy theories. The phrase itself is often seen as synonymous with some wacko, paranoid ideology, as you know. But in the introduction to Hidden History, you explain what a conspiracy theory really is and why it is valid when talking about modern American history. I'd like to ask you about the word conspiracy, and I'd like to know how you answer those who believe that researchers like you and I, who seek alternative answers, are just trying to find the conspiracy in everything.
Well, I think once you start investigating virtually any of these incidents, you see a pattern, and I prefer not to call them even conspiracies. I just think it's a timeline of organized corruption. This is the way that people that run things operate. It's a way of doing business. And so, to say it's a conspiracy theory, like to argue who killed JFK or who did 9/11 or whatever, it's just, all I can do is analyze the events, and the official stories of all these events are just preposterous. And anybody that examines them and really researches them independently discovers that rather quickly. So I don't think, again, this is the way people operate. They work in secret. They have their own means and their own agendas, and most of it is to keep their power and their money coming in. So there are very few principled people that are in positions to do anything of significance in America and around the world.
Right, and it's long been interesting to me that Americans still see themselves as sort of a unique, independent, and skeptical lot. Yet most Americans do share a blind faith and belief in the mainstream news media, the school textbooks, and the historical establishment. I'd like to know from you how we got to this point, how we fight this widespread blind belief, and how we get others to look elsewhere.
Well, in terms of history, I really believe that the vast majority of Americans are historically illiterate. If you look at people like Mark Dice and people like that have videos out there that just talk to random people on the street, and he usually works in San Diego, which is you would think a high-income area, and probably people are better educated than a lot of parts of the country. And they are just dumb as rocks. I mean, they don't know. I mean, he fools them with the most ridiculous questions imaginable. They don't even know the fake history, the history that's being sold to us, the establishment history, these official narratives. They don't even understand that. So imagine how hard it is for people like us to try to get them to understand how wrong the official story is when they don't even know what the official stories are. So it is very hard because people, a lot of people don't care about history, and that's been the case for a long time. I mean, Santayana a long time ago said those who don't remember history are condemned to repeat it. And that's what happens is people, don't remember it because they never did understand it, and they, in many cases, aren't interested in it. And but it's obviously very important because the more you understand about history, the more you can understand the new things that come along. And so, that's for instance, the war propaganda. I mean, you can go back to 1898 or even before that, and it's the same kind of propaganda. Babies being bayoneted, raping and pillaging. They really go after babies quite a bit. They love to stress that. And it's the same kind of propaganda, sometimes word for word, and Americans fall for it over and over again. And we've heard it recently with Syria, and now you're hearing some of it in regards to North Korea, about how everybody that we want to attack and we want to go to war with is always run by a madman. There's always some crazy guy there that we have to do something about, even though, as far as I can determine, North Korea, Syria, none of these countries have done anything to America, and they don't have any impact on our lives. But I know that our leaders in Washington, D.C. have done quite a few bad things to us, and in my mind, those are the people that we should be concerned about, and not people in any of these far-flung countries.
Well, how would you answer those who believe in an interventionist policy, who actually do genuinely say, if we don't go after them, who will?
Yeah, well, that's the question. Well, I don't really care because it's akin to like what America does all the time. We have a crumbling house. The roof is caving in. The kids are starving. The electricity's been cut off. But we're running all over the neighborhood, interfering in everyone's lives. Trying to sometimes fixing their roofs, sometimes setting the houses afire. Just doing crazy stuff while our own house literally crumbles. Our own people literally starve. And that's why the America First rhetoric from Trump was so appealing to so many people, because we hadn't heard that for a very long time, and I don't think it's something that should even be controversial. But unfortunately, in a country like ours, it was actually controversial to talk about taking care of your own people's first before anyone else.
Right. Some would probably call it jingoistic in a way, but I'm not so sure that it's wrong to want to rebuild your own house before you start reconstructing the entire town.
I taught high school for almost 10 years, Don, and my students would always want to know the conspiracies. And I used to always say, how can you know the conspiracies, which are the alternative, if you don't know the mainstream first?
Right.
And so I would have to teach them the mainstream history first so they would know what they're up against.
Right, exactly. And that's the problem, is trying to get through. And I think that's the biggest problem any of us have, is that you have to try to convince enough people to affect change, and so far we haven't been able to do it. But I think that with the recent election, I think you do see, just with the way the economy is now, I think there's so many people that are facing the reality of this awful economy, and there's the people that are drawn to Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, and even to the third-party candidates. And I think if they would ever coalesce behind each other, you'd see the kind of sweeping change that may be coming to England, with Brexit, and who knows with France if Le Pen gets in there. But we need something like that. And a lot of us thought Trump might be that figure. It doesn't look like he's going to be now. But but I think people, you can motivate them through their everyday lives. If they can't get a job, if they see they're not getting raises, if they do have a job and they're falling behind, living paycheck to paycheck. 62% of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings. Those kind of stats are just everywhere. They're going to be easier to, and I think it's easier to make them understand the extent of the corruption when they're falling on hard times, because that's the problem that I have in talking to anybody that is doing well. Is if they're doing well, hey, this is a great country. That's all that matters. They don't care that the vast majority of people aren't doing well. It's how they're doing, and certainly that would be a problem with trying to get a platform in the mainstream media, because anybody in the mainstream media is doing well. So again, they don't see the same problems that the people out there in the heartlands do, in the inner cities and the trailer parks, and just out there in the hinterlands. And so that's the thing, is there's such a disassociation between the people that rule us and us, and that's I think the big problem that we have.
Right. I'm actually in the Heartland, Don, and I can tell you that I suggest the website and the show to so many people. And the answer I'm met with most is, yes, I'd love to read the articles. I'd love to hear the show. But when? It seems harder for even a two-parent home with 3 children to make anything that closely resembles an average comfortable life, when the wages paid in this society never seem to increase to the level of the cost of living and working in this society. And to me, I guess that's part of the hidden history, per se, is that the people who need to not only know the real history, which are the people that need to read you or Jim Mars or the authors of Skyhorse or Trying Day, are those who are struggling just to stay above water economically. And so it seems to me that by making sure the supposed middle class is perpetually struggling, the elite also keep them inactive.
Right, and you hit on it right there, is that the people that would have the most free time to read any books, let alone mine or anyone else's that might be alternative history, are those who are going to be least attracted to it. Because, again, for them, they're doing well. So they're going to want to read what's popular, or, something that they hear talked about on television, what their friends are reading, their little book clubs they have and so forth, what Oprah's promoting, like that. They're not going to be interested. The people that would be drawn to my book, my next book especially, Survival of the Richest, is the people that would be most, impacted by that book are probably the least likely to read it, because, again, they're not likely to have a lot of, much of their budget available for books. That's why I always tell people, hey, I don't ask I'd love to have anyone buy my book, obviously, but, suggest it to your library system.
Absolutely.
That counts as a sale for me, too, and, you'll have to pay for it and take advantage of it.
Don, at what point in your life did you first start to question the way that you had been taught history?
Well, I questioned things early on, but I believe when I first started, I really didn't start looking into the Kennedy assassination until after Watergate made me politically aware a little bit, and I was pretty much a conventional liberal Democrat for a while. I voted for Jimmy Carter in '76, first chance I got to vote, and even though I really didn't love him, but he was the Democrat, and I couldn't vote for Gerald Ford, who was a Warren Commission member. So
nope, you can't cast that vote.
So once I started really uncovering exactly how extensive the cover-up to the Kennedy assassination was, and how they'd been lied to there, it opened so many other doors for me. And once I started realizing that the mainstream media that had been interested in Watergate had no interest at all in the Kennedy assassination. These same reporters, I volunteered for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry back in in the mid-'70s. And, we tried to talk to people in the media, to Congress people, and it was just, it was so frustrating because the liberal Democrats, I figured they were the good guys, and they had no interest in this subject at all.
Right.
No interest. They bought the lies, hook, line, and sinker that Oswald killed Kennedy alone. So that really opened my eyes, and it started leading me into other areas. I figured, well, this, even at that time, as I've tried to tell so many people in the JFK research community, the Kennedy assassination didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't as if there was just one moment of corruption, and that before that everything was cool, and ever since then everything's been cool. It was indicative of the way things work, and it was a kind of an extreme event because they took out a president in broad daylight, but
right.
It was indicative of how things work, and I think it opened a lot of people's eyes, but unfortunately it didn't open their eyes totally. Even today, most people think there was a conspiracy that aren't working, as Richard Belzer says, that aren't working for the media and the government, but everybody else pretty much knows it was a conspiracy.
Absolutely.
But a lot of those folks, they may believe 9/11 didn't happen the way it said, possibly. Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy assassinations, maybe. But beyond that, they're going to be left and right driven. So, my book, Hidden History, I think is important because I look at all these events, and, I expose the scandals of the Bush administrations, along with the Clinton administration and the Obama administration, Reagan, all of them. It's not a left-right thing. It's a way of doing business. It's just organized corruption, and you see the same thing over and over again. And as you can see, just by reading the book, the pattern's clear there.
Don, I've supported third parties for close to 20 years. Yet I keep hearing the challenging party saying that they must defeat the incumbent party or America is doomed forever. They always say that it's the most important election of our lifetime,
right.
Until they say it again 4 years later. It seems to me that it's two sides of the same coin, but how can we get the electorate to dispense with the coin altogether and look at a new way?
Well, yeah, it is, and I think what's the old expression? Don't vote if it only encourages them, and and that's the kind of. Unfortunately, I'm never one of those people who say, well, you have no right to complain if you didn't vote. Well, I'm educated enough to realize there's almost no one ever to vote for, at least not anybody who has a chance to win. I mean, I voted for Ralph Nader a couple times, Ross Perot a couple times, Pat Buchanan, Cynthia McKinney. None of these people ever had a chance to win, or maybe Perot the first time, but that's it. And, Donald Trump was the first Republican I ever voted for, and I did that because I didn't think he was a Republican. I thought, he was sounding like a populist, and I was hoping there was at least something legitimate there, but you have to have somebody to vote for, and you're doing your civic duty. And, as you know, in history, I have a whole section on vote scam and voter fraud, and we certainly saw that in this last cycle, where I think one of the most disappointing aspects of Bernie Sanders was how he refused to say anything about the massive corruption that denied him the party nomination. And we even had that in the WikiLeaks emails, that they basically described how they did it. And he never uttered a word of protest, and that's what makes you think, much as you're saying with Trump now, that they're all in on it, that none of them are sincere. Because if they were sincere, if you were legitimately competing for somebody for your party's nomination for president, you would have complained. But Ron Paul didn't complain in 2012 when the Republicans robbed him. And this is the problem is. That's why again Trump was so appealing, because he kept talking about the system being rigged. Things that we've been saying for a long time, but again, somehow it was rigged for him, I guess, because he won, and he, as soon as he got in office, obviously he's changed his tune dramatically. But I don't know, especially after Trump. I just don't know if we can place our hopes in any kind of politician, because it's going to be awfully hard for any candidate to really run on some a sound platform that will really appeal to what needs to happen. After Trump, had so many of those great talking points, in between some stupid stuff too. But he had so many great talking points that I could have written for him, and for him to just turn his back on everything like he has so far, it's just very disillusioning, and it's going to make it very hard for anyone else to echo those same themes, because no one's going to take them seriously, probably.
No, you're probably right. You're probably right, Don. We had Lynn Kolodny, the author of Silent Coup, on episode 003 of the show. And he gave us a pretty fascinating view of Watergate that focused on both Alexander Haig and John Dean. What are some of the things that you think Americans should know about the Watergate era?
Well, I know that. I've talked to him several times. He's a great guy. I think he's pretty much right on about Watergate. Again, Watergate was when I became politically aware, but I would say over the years I became, if you read Hidden History, you'll realize that I had relatively little to say about Watergate in there, other than there was an extensive unnatural death list. It came pretty much courtesy of the late, great Mae Brussell. But other than that, I believe it was really a two-bit burglary, as was described at the time. And I think that what is most interesting about it in retrospect is the fact that the mainstream media, it's the only time in my lifetime, and really maybe the only time in recorded history, going back and investigating these things for 100, 150 years, that they acted like the way you would expect an investigative press, an independent press, to act. They grilled Nixon at the press conferences. You had a deep throat. You had Woodward and Bernstein. I mean, at the time, as a teenager, I said, wow, that's what I want. I want to be the next Woodward and Bernstein. I want to be a cool investigative reporter and go out there and crusade for the truth. Well, a few years later, when I was, investigating the JFK assassination, I saw that these same guys didn't want anything to do with something which was much more important than a two-bit burglary. And, Ben Bradley, the editor of the Post, who published all these great revelations, this guy was supposedly JFK's best friend. Well, you find out that he's a typical Boston Blahman blue bud who's one of his best little playmates in childhood was Richard Helms, who later became a big CIA honcho. You find out Woodward had the same kind of background. So you find out, okay, well, why would they act so differently on this one subject? And again, every subject I cover in my book was treated the same way the Kennedy assassination has been treated by the mainstream media, with the exception of Watergate. So that tells you that it was there something else was going on there. That it was not business as usual, and that it was in fact kind of an engineered thing, as I believe, like Len Colandi said. I believe it was Nixon's political assassination. It was to get him out of office for whatever reason. I mean, I'm no fan of Nixon, but clearly, if you look at my book and just the way I, chronicled each of the administrations since Kennedy, he comes off better than all of them, except maybe Carter. I mean, they're really the only two that didn't have a body count and really didn't have extensive scandals, again, behind this Watergate thing. So I believe it was largely contrived, and so when people talk about Watergate, I prefer to move on to other subjects and say, this is, I think, really important only in terms of let's examine why the press acted so differently with Watergate than they have with everything else. And I think if we can answer that question, I think it opens other doors as to how the people that run things work.
Now, you mentioned Carter. Now, I understand his biography is the outsider from Plains, Georgia, the Baptist, the soft-spoken man who's going to go to Washington, D.C. to change things. But when he gets to Washington, D.C., he surrounds himself with all these internationalists who are involved in these geopolitical international secret societies such as the Bilderbergers, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations. How do you explain that?
Yeah, well, again, I wasn't surprised at the time because, I voted for him again. That was my first vote, and it was a typical lesser of two evils. I liked virtually every Democratic candidate that was running that year better than him. But okay, I was, even at that age, I was suspicious of this Georgia peanut farmer coming out of obscurity, and it was one of the first cases where we saw the mainstream media, again, acting the way they normally act, constantly promoting this guy as the front runner before a single primary had been out, before a vote had been cast in a single primary. They promoted the heck out of him, and the Trilateral Commission, I knew about that early on. He did surround himself with all the usual suspects, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was kind of the Democratic Party's version of Henry Kissinger. Carter, and what's important there is that this, again, he was elected in 76. It was the height of interest in the JFK assassination. This is when we were trying to lobby Congress to reinvestigate, open up a new investigation, which became, of course, the House Select Committee on Assassinations. As far as I remember, and I used to listen keenly because I was hoping he'd say something, Carter never talked about the Kennedy assassination. Never talked about it. He would sometimes say good things about John Kennedy, but he would never say anything, about the assassination. And this was at a time, people don't remember, his sister, Ruth Cardle Stapleton, was very involved. She was she was an evangelist. She was friends with the pornographer Larry Flint when he was offering $1 million to anyone who could find the true killers of JFK, typically sensational kind of thing. But so he had to know. He had people in his own family that were interested in it, yet he never uttered a word about it. And, of course, when Ted Kennedy ran about against him in 1980, he really was despicable in many ways. He said awful things about Kennedy, and he kept saying he wasn't going to bring up Chappaquiddick, but he kept bringing it up, saying he wasn't going to talk about it. So, I mean, Carter. So I don't mean to make Carter sound like a hero. It's just what has come after him. His Middle East policy certainly looks much better in retrospect than what we have now as alternative energy sources. And again, just what we've had ever since then. Really, I mean, the economy was obviously awful with the terrible interest rates and so forth. But again, he was nobody's hero. He was no JFK. But I would just, I would categorize him like Nixon. I think they did the least amount of harm of all these other presidents. I mean, certainly all the others I talked about, OBJ, Reagan, both Bushes, Clinton, Obama, these administrations were just devastating to the impact they had on the average American, and they brought us to the situation, the state we're in today, I think.
Well, speaking of the Carter administration, I'm interested in one of the more fascinating yet unknown to mainstream America parts of our modern history. The scene is 1980, and it was an election year, Carter versus Reagan, and we were 400 plus days into the Iranian hostage crisis. Don, what was the October surprise, and who was involved?
Well, again, that's one of those scandals that Barbara Honegger wrote a book called The October Surprise later in the 80s, and the theory there is that the release of the hostages was delayed just long enough so that Jimmy Carter didn't get a bump, at the end of his administration during the 1980 campaign, and was slaughtered as a result by Reagan. And you had a guy like Gunther Russbacher, who was a pilot who swore and had credible people that backed him up, that he flew people like CIA Director Casey and Vice President to-be George Herbert Walker Bush over to talk to the Iranian officials and arrange this. And, of course, afterwards you had October Surprise melded into the Iran-Contra affair, where you had Oliver North first going on the stage. And I would urge people that are interested in this subject in detail to read Compromised by Terry Reid. It's a fantastic book, and it does a great job on delineating the false nature of the left-right paradigm. We saw it in this case particularly because Oliver North would later kind of inexplicably become a popular talking head on TV. He ran for the Senate in my state at one point. He would portray himself as this enemy of the Clintons. His arch enemy was Bill Clinton. Well, if you read Terry Reid, Oliver North behind the scenes was involved working with Bill Clinton in Arkansas. And again, all these things are connected. One of the central points of their operation in smuggling drugs through to go to the Contras was through Mena Airport in Arkansas. And of course, Mena Airport in Arkansas would later become important for lots of scandals, including those that took the life of my friend Linda Hayden Ives' son Kevin Ives. The two boys on the train tracks are two of the probably most notable deaths in the long Clinton body count. So all these things are kind of connected together. But October Surprise, again, I think it was given some of the left-wing people still kind of, they'll accept most of the conspiracies that make Bush and Reagan look bad, but they just don't talk about them too much, and they don't look at the connections like I do. They just kind of think that maybe they're isolated incidents, wink, wink. Yeah, they made it so that Reagan could get elected by holding up the release of the hostage just long enough, but there's no in-depth analysis afterwards. Well, how could they make that happen? Why would anybody, these hostages were held over our head for, the count we saw every night on Nightline Day, whatever it is, with American held hostage. Americans felt awful about it, so for any politicians to delay their release at all for political reasons, I mean, it's hard to think of anything more reprehensible.
Right, it's unconscionable. Part of my own experience stems from the murders at Waco in April of 1993. Would you tell us a little bit more about what really happened at Waco and contrast that with what we were told happened there?
Well, Waco, I remember very well happening, and I remember arguing with my family and friends at the time because it was just such an eye-opener because we've crossed so many boundaries. I call them lines in the sand over the years, and I think Waco was an important line in the sand that we crossed because, again, the mainstream media, and it was probably in large part due to the fact that a so-called liberal Democrat was president. Our first woman attorney general was in there, and Janet Reno, very involved in this. They crossed the line in the sand where they had this huge, military-style assault. And, the best case scenario for them is that they were just trying to have a show-off for public relations purposes. But whatever happened, obviously it backfired. So many people died, and then they were proven wrong over and over again. There was no evidence against David Koresh that he was abusing these children, and their own Justice Department admitted it afterwards. But they still smeared him. I remember Bill Clinton in a press conference saying he was a child abuser. His own Justice Department just released a report saying he wasn't. So this is how removed from reality these people are. And again, there wasn't a Woodward and Bernstein in that press conference to grill Bill Clinton. Well, what are you talking about? Hold up a report and say, Mr. President, your own Justice Department just cleared David. I mean, that's what a real reporter would do. But they don't do that. They go along with it, and they smear people like us as conspiracy theorists that say it. But I mean, they certainly stopped those children from being abused by killing them. I mean, they used gas that was banned under the Geneva Convention. I mean, it was unbelievable. If David Koresh was doing anything wrong at all, he went into town regularly. He was known to everyone. They could have simply approached him, arrested him there in town if they needed to be. There was absolutely no reason for some kind of huge armed assault on their compound. And again, the media constantly referred to it as a compound, an armed compound, instead of what was their home. They chose to live that way. And so just they demonized them, and they killed them, and then they blamed them for the whole thing after they killed them. So it was a real eye-opener, and obviously the way these things are connected, again, it led inexorably to Oklahoma City because so many people were upset about it. And again, nothing was done. The press didn't do anything. Only the far right-wing extremists. And by this time, again, I was certainly no liberal Democrat. And during the Clinton years especially, I got almost all my information from extreme right-wing sources because that's the only place you got any alternative news. So you take your facts from the people who are actually doing the investigations in these cases.
Well, right. Well, like you just said, what struck me even back then was this word compound. Bad people live in compounds. Totalitarians live in compounds. But for everyone who lived there, it wasn't a compound, it was a home. For all of those people that died that day, it was a home. It was not a compound. And these are games that are played in the media to use words like compound so that you see them as inherently bad. As you said, the Justice Department had released reports saying that Koresh was not abusing children. And for the first time, actually, we saw a tank going through the front door. A tank going through the front door, and people still believe that Koresh had started the fire? It was just insanity, Don. And yet, the people still believed what they were told on the news rather than what they had just seen with their own eyes. I just didn't understand it and still don't to this day.
Yeah, I had so many arguments with my friends over there. They just bought into it hook, line, and sinker, and it's the same kind of code words you see: compound, cult. They like to use cult a lot. Cult leader David Koresh, Panamanian strongman Manuel Noriega. These are the kind of things. Korean. I don't know what they don't really have a name for the Kim over in Korea, but I guess they're not as creative anymore. They haven't made up some cute little term they can call him over and over again, but. This is what we get, weapons of mass destruction later and so forth, and it just gets drummed in the public head, and no one ever stops to think. And in the case of Waco, like I used to tell people, I said, the Branch Davidians, they certainly didn't sound like I would want to be a member of the Branch Davidians. I mean, they had kind of an extreme, extreme religious sect, not a cult, but whatever they were, they had a right to their beliefs, and they certainly shouldn't have had to worry about being murdered by the U.S. government. But there was a case where basically, I think it can be argued conclusively that the United States government killed them, killed all the 80 children, whatever it was there, killed all the people there, and then blamed them for their own deaths. And again, they were doing nothing, and they kept saying they were that was another term, if you notice, called stockpiling weapons. And I said, what does that even mean? Stockpiling weapons? How do you? That's not any kind of a legal term that can be defined. Well, what is stockpiling? More than how many? And but again, that's what you get. And the press didn't do their job there, just as they haven't done their job with anything. And again, that's why it still makes me so suspicious of Watergate, because that's the one time, even though I think they sold the story wrong. They fabricated it, but they did at least act as if they were investigating something. And they just haven't done that in any of these other cases.
No, they certainly have not. You referred to the Oklahoma City bombings of 1994. Do you believe that Timothy McVeigh acted alone?
Well, no, I definitely don't think he acted alone. And I think he was very much like Oswald. He had a very similar background to Oswald, where he could be tied to Oswald could be tied to all the communist and anti-Castro and pro-Castro groups. McVeigh could be tied to all of these patriot groups, and a lot of, for instance, he subscribed to the Spotlight. That's where I subscribed to that newspaper at the time, because that was the only alternative news source you could get back then. They would tell the truth about these. They told the truth about Waco and Oklahoma City and these kind of things, but McVeigh was convicted on his beliefs. If you watched or covered, again, the Spotlight covered his trial and had transcripts and told you the truth about what was going on, they would, the testimony there was basically introduction of evidence like periodicals like the Spotlights, books like the Turner Diaries, and all these extreme right-wing things that McVeigh, he read this. And, the jury was, and then again, we crossed a line in the sand there. Because in that fiasco of a trial, for the first time in U.S. legal history, they allowed the family members of victims to testify. Now they were witnesses to nothing except their own grief. They weren't there, and the legal system used to recognize how prejudicial that was. But in this case, they allowed it, and again, we crossed another line in the sand. Where were the civil libertarians? They didn't exist because the civil libertarians are all gone now, and especially in a case like this where the guy being demonized and convicted was, a real extreme right-winger who was accused of killing all these, it was very convenient that the daycare center was there. So again, they could talk about all the children that were killed. And again, it just was, and what happened after that? Ross Perot in 92 had gotten 19% of the vote. For his 96 campaign, he was going to run again, and I believe it was derailed forever, and the third-party movement was derailed because of that incident. Bill Clinton, he exploited a tragedy like no other president. He was even better at it than Obama was, and he exploited this much as he could. He talked about the children. He demonized talk radio. He demonized the militia groups. So, the Internet was really just about starting. It really didn't have any impact. Most people didn't get on the Internet yet at that point, 95. But if that had not happened, you can imagine, I think a lot more people would have been drawn to third-party type of movement, Ross Perot's Reform Party, so forth, that looked like it could be a viable third party. But Oklahoma City killed all that, and we went right back to that two-party nonsense, and you really haven't had a third-party candidate that's gotten more than a couple of percent since then.
Well, the Barack Obama years are barely in our rearview mirror. So, as you know, it's now time for the historians to do what they do best, which is spin the real history into their own narrative, what they want it to be. What will be the Obama conspiracies that we'll be reading about for years to come?
Well, I don't know if you read about them, you're going to be reading them in books like mine. You're not going to read them there won't be any conspiracies in the establishment story. I mean, they may talk about how there was a conspiracy to get him, which is Hillary Clinton had the vast right-wing conspiracy to get her husband. Then they talk about, even Donald Trump, again, one of his first really awful moves where he just basically said Obama was born in this country. I don't know where Obama was born, but I do know that he had at least 5 different Social Security numbers. There's a lot of things about his life that remain classified. His school records remain things that don't make any sense. He was the president of the United States. None of that stuff should be classified, and it hasn't been classified for any other president. So again, if we had real journalists, they'd go after that, but they don't. They just smear you and call you a birther. I'm not calling him anything. I don't know, where he was born. I mean, there are people out there that have huge conspiracy theories that he was engineered in a lab or something. He doesn't appear to have a history, and that's what happens when you get that kind of wild speculation when you don't know the facts, and the facts aren't there. But the establishment historians will cover it up when they write their books on the Obama administration. My guess is most liberal Democratic presidents, with the notable exception of John F. Kennedy, of course. He will have a great reputation. Eventually, they'll come to, in retrospect, we'll appreciate him more. Would be my guess as to how they will rate him. But I think we're finding out with Trump that these guys, I'm talking about him so much, but they're largely figureheads, and they're I think we all know that there are people behind the scenes that are manipulating them and ordering them to do whatever they do. But in Obama's case, I obviously wasn't a big fan of his, but even some of his my next book, Survival of the Richest, the original title of that was going to be "You Didn't Build That," So I thought that was, a great little speech he made. You didn't build that because he was exactly right about that. Luck plays a part in things, and nobody does things without some kind of help. And that's one of the few times he was really blasted by pretty much everyone. What do you mean you didn't build that? And they changed the title to Survival of the Richest, but that's one of the themes of the book. It's not because I admire Obama at all, but everybody a broken clock is right twice a day. So Obama, I think on that point, I think he had some rhetoric that I could agree with.
Well, I think Obama will, in retrospect, get points for two things. One will be Obamacare, which has me baffled, and two will be the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden. What are your thoughts on the capture and killing of bin Laden compared to the story that we were told by the Obama administration themselves?
Well, whenever he died, I think we have Steve Pachanik and people like that claimed he was dead years before that. But I certainly don't think he died the way they claimed he did. I don't think that ridiculous raid that we saw a horrified, just remember, talk about, these are the kind of things that make people think of Sandy Hook and Boston bombing and just think it's all an act. Because, they filmed, if you remember those pictures, of a horrified Hillary Clinton and the Joe Biden and all the cabinet, they were supposedly watching like there was some live footage of the capture of Osama bin Laden, and then later they had to admit, well, no, there was no video feed. So what were they were posing like that? These are the leaders of our country, so that, was, and then of course when they if you remember, as I detail in my book, they originally published just an absurd Photoshop image of bin Laden supposedly after he'd been killed, and they basically just had to wipe that off the internet because the people on the internet just proved what a forgery it was. So they had to take it down, and then they just kind of came up with this ridiculous thing that they had dumped his body at sea in the Muslim tradition, which you talk to any Muslim, and there's not any Muslim in the world that's going to tell you it's a tradition to dump their bodies at sea. But of course, that conveniently makes it impossible for them to produce the evidence. So, but yeah, the whole story was absurd, and it was engineered to make Obama look tough. And then, again, we crossed another line in the sand there. Obama crossed so many lines. When Hillary crossed that line when she said, "We came, we saw, he died," that kind of thing. And Obama was the first president, again, a liberal. I like to liken it back, if you consider back in 1976, President Gerald Ford, a Warren Commission member, no doubt, typical conservative Republican, he was pressured after the Church Committee hearings in the CIA plots against Castro to sign an executive order forbidding assassination by the CIA or any American government agency as a policy weapon. So we recognized at that time, and public polls at the time showed most Americans then would have been against assassinating Hitler because they recognized assassination crossed a huge moral line. Flash forward to 2010 or whenever it was that the bin Laden thing happened. Obama brags about it. He basically spiked the football. And he doesn't even make up a story that we had to do it because he was trying to kill some of our men or something. And then he starts with the drones and starts joking, "I'm good at killing people." He kills an American citizen, Anwar al-Awlabi, who was an American citizen, never even charged with the crime. He drone striked and killed him, and then he killed his 16-year-old son, coincidentally, one connected, according to the media, the next month. We crossed so many moral lines in the sand there. Just think of it, going in basically less than 40 years, going from not even wanting to assassinate Hitler to recognizing how verboten that was, to assassinating an American citizen who had not even been charged with the crime and bragging about it, joking about it. But that's where we are now, and unfortunately, that was never one of Trump's attractions. I don't think Trump would hesitate to assassinate anyone. He's Mr. Law and Order, so it was never one of his appealing aspects that any of us thought that he would try to turn the tide back on that issue.
Right. And once again here, I think the terminology is important. When the words terrorist or terrorism are used, it's almost code for the people to allow the largest state carte blanche to do whatever needs to be done to eliminate the terrorist threat or supposed terrorist threat. But again, who do we trust, Don, to label someone a terrorist? Or what do we use? The various incarnations of the Patriot Act? I hope not. But we seem to be willing to allow the U.S. military to treat citizens around the world very different than we would allow another country's armed forces to treat our own citizens.
Well, look at the way we're going after Kim and North Korea, And we've been, rattling sabers with Iran for many years about them having nuclear weapon programs. Israel has, one of the biggest nuclear weapon programs in the world, and it's all courtesy of our money. They gave them that. And in our case, we talk about how we don't want these dictators, these crazy dictators, to have nuclear weapons because they might, be loose with them and not just fling them off somewhere. Well, we're still the only country that ever dropped, weapons on, and we dropped them on Japan twice back in the 1940s, and that still doesn't stop us from lecturing them. I mean, Russia, the Soviet Union, all the years of existence, they never dropped a nuclear bomb on anybody. So Red China never did. Only America did. And again, we justify that. We brag about it. Liberal historians talk about, you talk about Orwell doublespeak. It's one of the greatest examples ever where they said dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki saved lives. That's the line you hear all the time. Truman saved lives. And of course he has a great reputation because these same historians, that's why Trump got the only good coverage he's gotten ever since he was elected. They hated this guy. He drops a bomb on Syria for no reason. Suddenly his ratings shoot through the roof. Everybody loves him. The media loves war. They want it all the time because that's the way our system is geared, because of the way the wealth is distributed, the way the corporatocracy works, the defense contractors and so forth. Without war, it can't work. Then you have to look, we really have to start taking some of that money from the top and not trickling it down, but actually start distributing it. But as long as you have a war, you can trick even the lowest income people who are suffering. You can just trick them into waving the flag and distract them with these boogeymen that are everywhere.
Right, exactly. The Trump administration is relatively new at this point, but I'm already starting to see a lot of commentary among the alternative researchers regarding what's really going on in Washington, D.C. So as the author of Hidden History, as someone who watches these things keenly and in a way that maybe mainstream America does not, what interests you so far about the Trump administration?
Well, I certainly was watching it keenly. Trump was so entertaining when he first started. I was actually watching his speeches. I hadn't done that with a politician since, I just watched JFK's recorded speeches because I loved him so much. But a live politician, I had no interest. Maybe Ross Perot, but not like Trump. I was hanging on his every. He was just so damn entertaining, and same thing with his press conferences, the few he's had, where he's just calling them out constantly, saying, fake news, sit down, and not. That was so refreshing because, again, those of us who study these events know how bad the mainstream media is. So we thought, well, it's great, but something. He certainly the way his advisors. His vice presidential pick, Pence, was awful. That caused me concern, but I thought, well, okay, maybe he's just doing what Kennedy did with LBJ. But when he started announcing these appointments, and one after the other, was just, half of them worked at Goldman Sachs, and it's just one after the other that were, every one of them, a longtime residents of the swamp. And he's supposed to be draining the swamp, and the only two that could be portrayed at all as perhaps an outsider were Bannon and Flynn. And of course, Flynn was, he just got rid of him unceremoniously, unfairly, and I believe he got rid of Flynn because Flynn's son, was a big Pizzagate guy. He was tweeting about that constantly and trying to expose that. I think they were embarrassed by it, and Trump got rid of him. And Bannon has been declawed, where he apparently, I guess he's still in the administration, but he has no power, and so Trump is now completely surrounded. But again, he's portrayed, even on a lot of conspiracy sites still, as, well, a good guy, but the swamp got him, and, he can't do anything. I said, well, my answer would be, how did the swamp make him appoint all these guys? Why? He didn't. What was really disappointing about Trump is the other administrations have had, like Jimmy Carter, his best nominee, if you probably don't remember it, but he tried to get Ted Sorensen, JFK's main speechwriter, in as CIA director. And I think Sorensen wanted to abolish the CIA. And, of course, he wasn't approved, but at least he tried. So even Jimmy Carter tried that. But in Trump's case, he hasn't tried to get anybody in that has been rejected. He hasn't tried to get why didn't he nominate Judge Andrew Napolitano for the Supreme Court? That's some typical neocon, typical conservative guy, like, who started bad-mouthing him as soon as he got in there. The guy's an awful pig. Napolitano would have been great. Where's Roger Stone? My friend Roger Stone. I thought he might be chief of staff. He's nowhere to be seen. Whereas, guys like Paul Craig Roberts or reach across the aisle, Dennis Kucinich would be great. And he's been more supportive of Trump than most of the Republicans. Where's Rand Paul? None of these guys. It's all the people that appeal to McCainiac and Lindsey Graham and Paul Ryan, who all hated Trump. And until recently, Reince Priebus is not exactly a great guy to be chief of staff, but the assistant chief of staff was a girl who was a never-Trumper, a public never-Trumper, and was best friends with a woman in the DNC. And Trump had her on there for months, for a couple months, and it's like, saying, how does he not know this? But, so either he's just completely clueless and maybe is as ignorant as he sounds sometimes, or the whole thing was a psyop, and he was designed and packaged as a fake populist to try to rally all that anger and resentment behind somebody, and then maybe they just figure people will just go away, or they'll fall behind some other fake populist next election.
And that may very well be the intention. But what bothers me about this is that we as a people always decry the fact that we don't have a politician that'll speak off the cuff, that we don't have someone that's honest and will say what they think. Then when we do get those populist sort of speakers, we destroy them for their lack of polish, their lack of tact, and, well, for being exactly what we said we wanted them to be. So I'm starting to think that we really do want polished, slick, professional politicians.
Well, I think that, again, I think the country is really divided. They're divided over mostly superficial things, or mostly cultural things. But on the one side, you have the people on the left who are into transgender bathrooms and abortion rights, radical feminism, now radical Islam for some reason, which is a strange phenomenon, really. But these things most people are just never, there's so many people that are never going to come around to that. On the other hand, you have people on the right that are still really born-again Christians, that are very conservative, that cling to these traditional values that really were defeated decades ago. And on those cultural issues alone, they're never going to find common ground. And that's why I was hoping so much that the Bernie Sanders, because there was so much overlap between the people that wanted Bernie Sanders and those who wanted Trump, on trade especially, trade issues and economic issues, and even I was hoping on foreign policy, but they couldn't get past those cultural issues, those differences, and so they would never, I hate Trump, I hate Sanders, so, and that's, it's unfortunate, and that's why it's hard to form a coalition, but between, again, most people can't get past this left-right paradigm, and you're going to hear the same people that remain loyal to Trump. They're going to make word for word, you will read and hear the exact same excuses that those on the left made for Obama. Same thing when George W. Bush is in there as opposed to Clinton. So people can never realize, hey, look, it never changes. It's the same stuff. There's always a reason why my guy had to do this. He had to go bomb that country. He had to, he couldn't do anything with our infrastructure that has been so overdue for repair after so many decades. It's collapsing, but somehow we always have to find some threat. This guy Kim in North Korea, again, as far as I know, he's never done anything to us, but he's a threat that has to be removed now. Same thing as Osama bin Laden was. Of course, when you create an event like 9/11, and so much of the stuff changed since 9/11. Then if you can convince any significant members of the public that there is a boogeyman, this huge, tall Muslim guy, three-neighbor Osama bin Laden, if you can convince them that this guy somehow orchestrated it all from a cave, well, again, you tug on their emotions, and people just won't think. The public is exemplified. I remember this guy, comedian Dennis Leary, who's one of my least favorite people, entertainers, but I remember there was a clip of him where some 9/11 truthers were trying to confront him, and he just got so belligerent and said, "My brother's a firefighter." That was his response. It's like, what is it? And he wasn't even a New York firefighter. I think he's from Boston, but that's there's so many people that are that stupid. What do you, if your brother was a firefighter, what does that have to do with the story of 9/11? Unless, and he wasn't even in New York. Maybe if he's a New York firefighter, you might say, but even then, it's like nobody that's asking those questions are saying that the fireman was fake, or what he did was bad, or he was covering. Nobody says that, and that's what you get in all these cases. Well, you're defaming the memory of the victims. No, we're trying to find out what really happened. We're asking the questions that I would want if it was my family member. I would want to know, the truth. I would want to, and I would hope I'd be, intelligent enough to see through these ridiculous emotion-driven narratives that they don't change over the course of time. They're always pat, and there's always some demon, some lone guy that they can come up with the blame for it. And it's if my book shows anything, it's that these official stories are all ridiculous, and they're just fairy tales. But too many people still believe them.
And now, because you brought it up, and because I've been fascinated by how this story is played out, I'm going to ask you about the one alternative news story that doesn't seem to be going away. It's also the one that even some alternative researchers and conspiracy theorists seem to be tiptoeing around, including, yes, even Alex Jones of Infowars.com. Yep. That story is Pizzagate. What is Pizzagate? And in that context, who is Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah, well, certainly, and again, in Hidden History, I have a whole section on the child sex scandals going back to the Franklin Credit. This is a really sick underbelly of our leadership, is that it's just undeniable. You find it again and again when you investigate these things, that there's a predilection among the people that run things of wanting to have sex with children. That's their go-to thing. They get a chance, that's what they want. You see it over and over again. Pizzagate, and again, they called it Pizzagate. It was catchy, and again, everything's gate, ever since Watergate, so it's kind of a way to designate a scandal. But the Pizzagate was there not so much at first for the Comet ping pong, where James Alefantis, the guy that Alex Jones, unbelievably apologized to. This guy's not scared of Hillary Clinton, but he apologized to this guy, pizza parlor owner. But the references, at least from I was reading the WikiLeaks releases and of John Podesta's, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager's emails, and it was amazing how many references there were to pizza and pasta, and references that made no sense. Like, I think I'll have pizza for half an hour. My favorite was when there was an email about, I think you left your napkin here. There seems to be a pizza-related map on it. Just, references to pizza and pasta that make no sense. And in the urban underground, the urban legend type of thing, supposedly pizza and pasta have long been, code words for sex with little girls or little boys, depending on which one is used. And just to see that many, there was way too many. I don't believe that a guy the stature of a Podesta is going to be constantly emailing about pizza and pasta. It's just, it just makes no sense. But if you read the releases, something is there. And then when Alefantis came out and when people online started analyzing his Instagram account, because this is stuff, nobody invaded his privacy. It was out there. And just really disturbing images of a really little girl duct taped to a table there at the pizza parlor, a room, like a stained steel room they joked about being a kill room. They were digging a hole at one point and kind of joking, inferring about very nefarious things there. Just so it just cried out for, again, an independent journalist to, and this guy Podesta, on another Instagram account, I think, somebody's published a picture of a painting that's in Podesta's office, which is a cannibal painting. It's one human being eating another. Now, and then there were the spirit cooking releases where, apparently this is something new. I wasn't even aware of it. Apparently there seems to be a predilection among the elite for cannibalism. Or at least there seems to be a lot of references to it there. So I don't know we can even begin to understand what goes on behind the scenes at the very top, but I certainly don't think it's anything, especially in light of what we know about the Franklin credit scandal, the finders, the people I talked about in my book. There's been these, they have people like Candy O'Brien, I think her name was, years ago, that made these allegations, and we know that the woman that was assassinated, I mentioned in the book, that was with the, I can't remember the state, she was one of maybe Georgia, social services, foster care. She was trying to expose the kind of abuse that goes on in the foster care system, and her husband was found dead under very strange circumstances. There's a lot there, so for these disclosures to come out, again, it begs for a real press, but we don't have a real press. So that's the problem. So all you have are people on the internet or people like me, and all we can do is speculate, and we don't want to destroy anybody's reputation. We don't want to smear anybody, but there certainly seems to be a lot of smoke there, and where there's that much smoke, there's usually some fire. So I think the questions need to be asked.
Right, and when I read the Kathy O'Brien story, which is called The Transformation of America, it was one story after another of CIA mind control mixed with sexual slavery. And I kept laughing, and I'm thinking, this is the most bizarre story I've ever read. But one thing I recalled, though, was that she kept talking about how rampant the mind control and sexual slavery was among Pennsylvania politicians. Well, fast forward years to the Jerry Sandusky Penn State University story, and there were a few reports that Pennsylvania politicians had very close ties to this child sex abuse ring involving Sandusky.
Right. Exactly, and you had a DA there, Ray Greiser, that disappeared mysteriously under circumstances, was investigating this, and his hard drive, I think, was found, his laptop was found with the hard drive missing in a river, so just, organized crime type of stuff. And, I doubt, Sandusky was kind of the sacrificial lamb there, I believe. I doubt very seriously this was a guy who was raping a little boy in the shower stall, where all the players came in to take their shower. So he felt comfortable enough doing something like that out in the open. So that tells me that he didn't fear being discovered because it was probably a pretty common thing. I don't for a minute think Penn State was the only college doing this. And again, I think it's part of that really dark, unseemly underbelly where our leaders seem to want to have sex with kids. And they would have to explain it, but I would urge anyone, read my book. There's a chapter about it, and if you can watch the excellent documentary Conspiracy of Silence that was pulled from, I believe, the Discovery Channel at the last minute by pressure. It was supposed to air back in the 90s. The video's no good, but you can still get it online and read John DeCamp's book, Franklin Credit Scandal, and these are Franklin cover-up. It's a huge story, but again, I think in so many of these stories, what we run into is that there's a normalcy bias, and people they don't want to accept the fact that this stuff is going on. They don't want to believe their leaders are capable of these things, and I don't think any of us want to accept that. But it is what it is, and when you get these allegations over and over again, it's just undeniable. And that's why I think something like WikiLeaks is such an important source for everyone. And when they published those disclosures of Podesta's emails, they were really eye-opening because we really got an insight into the way these people operate. I'd love to see all their, the emails, all our leaders, because I can only imagine how open he was. At least if this is any kind of code language. But again, it's in the if you read Snopes, the mainstream media outlet online, and any newspaper, any television station, they'll just laugh if you even bring it up and act like you're the worst criminal in the world for even using the term. But it is what it is. Like I said, it's just organized corruption.
Do you have a theory on why Alex Jones might be doing an about-face on the story?
Well, for a long time online, it was rumored about his marriage on the rocks, and now that has come to pass. And I think I believe I was really disappointed in the Pizzagate apology, and then especially because he doubled down afterwards to talk about these other scandals, but a lot of them were with Jimmy Savile, people that were conveniently dead, not the same kind of hot story as Pizzagate was. I believe now, in retrospect, I give him kind of, I admire Alex Jones. I was on InfoWars Nightly News once, back when my book was first published. And so, I've watched him for a long time. I admire him. He's still, pretty much the biggest source for alternative news. But I think that probably his divorce battle had something to do with that, because I think he's and you can see now, he's trying to portray himself, because his ex-wife is trying to portray him as, this disturbed character that's a danger to his children. So I think he's trying to, distance himself from especially something like Pizzagate, which has been ridiculed so much in the mainstream media. YouTube has, I think, taken down more videos on that subject than anything. So I think that, and what's more disappointing about Alex Jones is how he's so on the Trump bandwagon. He won't. The show has changed so much because he won't admit that Trump has flip-flopped so much, and that how disappointing Trump's appointment's been. And Roger Stone, too. I mean, I love Roger Stone, but I don't know how he's remaining loyal to somebody that's, and I know Roger definitely doesn't agree with bombing countries and so forth, but I mean, it's bombed Syria and is rattling a saber against North Korea and Iran. It's certainly not any kind of America First position.
And one more question about the Pizzagate tie-in. Who is Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, he's supposedly the guy that runs what they call Pedo Island, or Pedophile Island, or Lilith Island, I think it is. He was actually convicted of having sex with, he's a billionaire, with underage girls, and he has an island where, again, they call it Lolita Island, where he's brought very many renowned and famous people, including Bill Clinton many times, and Donald Trump. And in Trump's case, another one of his more disappointing things, I believe it was his, I want to say Secretary of the Treasury, I can't remember, one of his appointments, one of his secretaries, was the guy who had let Jeffrey Epstein off with a slap on the wrist. And he, Trump appointed him to a high position in his cabinet. So again, you can't help but wonder about all these guys, because if you knew that there were, underage kids, apparently sex slaves, I don't know how they could not be sex slaves, because I don't believe that parents would willingly let them go to an island like that. If you knew that this guy was using children like that for that purpose, it's hard to imagine that you would want to go participate in that unless, you wanted a piece of the action. So that's why people wonder, and, certainly in Bill Clinton's case, I mean, he appears to be, if there is such a thing as a sex addict, he may very well be one. And in Trump's case, we know he has an eye for the girls. I don't know if he's ever been accused of liking underage girls, but the connection there is disturbing. And, again, that's one of the questions of all the criticism, Donald. I mean, I posted something on Facebook a while back about the questions that the press, the reasonable, legitimate criticism of Trump. There never has been any, and that would be something that somebody might, why did you appoint this guy that let Jeffrey Epstein off? But again, the people in the press, some of them may have been to Lolita Island themselves, and or hope to aspire to go there someday. So that's the problem you get, is the people that they don't want to lose their position, and these things don't bother them enough. What they're more concerned about is power, prestige, and money, and that's they don't want to lose that.
Right. Well, if there's someone out there who's new to alternative history and would like to become involved, I would first point them to Hidden History, of course, your fantastic work. But where else would you point them?
Well, my book is unique in that I think it's really the only book of its kind that has all these different subjects there. But for the Kennedy assassination, I mean, you mentioned Jim Mars Crossfire is a real good book. And Jim Mars has actually written, but Jim Mars also goes over into the kind of the UFO, strange phenomena territory too, which I'm also interested in too. I just really haven't written anything published on it. So anything by Jim Mars is good. The classic books on the Kennedy assassination, going back to Mark Lane and Harold Weisberg, Sylvia Moore, Chester's Head the Fact, these are great. For the more recent subjects, there was a lot of published literature on the Kennedy assassination, both Kennedy and JFK and RFK. But in more recent cases, even 9/11, there's not that many books. You're better off probably just surfing around and trying to find. There's tons and tons of videos on YouTube, tons of websites out there still that show you how these official stories. And I don't care if it's 9/11 or going forward to Sandy Hook, a Boston bombing. As far as you care, basically almost any event that happens now, these guys on the internet, they deconstruct it and blow holes in it within, a day or so. I mean, it's amazing. But so I think now it's changed to where books, so you want to get everything in one package. Hidden History is real good for that. I don't know of any other book that has everything in it like that, because again, most authors are coming at it from a left or right perspective. In my book, I've had people, I had Cindy Sheehan, who's about as left-wing as you can get, read a blurb report. Cynthia McKinney is very left-wing, wrote a blurb report. Roger Stone, very right-wing, wrote the introduction to the paperback. Jerome Corsi, very right-wing, loved it. So people on the far left and the far right, they can all find something in my book, because I'm equal opportunity. I'm going after everybody. But most writers, if they do approach a variety of subjects, are still going to have a bias, and they're going to, they're going to go after the scandals, that impact whatever administration they were most opposed to. But in my book, like I said, none of them none of them since JFK have been worth anything in my book.
We have a question from Amy in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. She writes, Donald, what are the commonalities or connections between the conspiracies mentioned in Hidden History?
Well, I think you can find again that way. I think it's in Hidden History documents what I think is an unrelenting timeline of organized corruption. I think you see the unnatural deaths similarities in almost all these cases. You see unnatural deaths everywhere that just surround almost all these cases. You see withheld evidence, even to for instance, JFK assassination. We still have so much withheld on grounds of national security, which those of us who have investigated have asked for years. Well, if it was a lone assassin with no connections, what national security ramifications over 50 years later could there still be? So you see that. You also see the lost or destroyed evidence. The strangely, things that you just wouldn't think would be possible. Like, for instance, in the RFK assassination, the pantry, the ceiling tiles, which were very important to analyze, where the bullets and then the magic bullets that were flying around that pantry, they're discovered to be missing. Those things like that. You see it in so many of these cases, and in the more recent cases, you actually see the crime scenes be destroyed. For instance, Oklahoma City. The remains were carted away before McVeigh's defense team could have it independently analyzed to see if there was indeed explosives in there, as most of us believe there was. Obviously, the 9/11, all that stuff was hauled away before it could be independently analyzed. And down to, Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook, the school was completely demolished. I mean, who ever heard of that? They just absolutely destroyed the school. So, because, again, the people that were criticizing it, they wanted to go inside. They weren't even allowed to go inside. There was a huge fence put around it. No one could even approach it because they wanted to see, what was going on in there. They want to see the blood and the bullet holes and so forth. Well, no. Crime scene was destroyed.
Well, Sandy Hook is another example where you're not even allowed to question the story because children have been killed.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's what you get, and that's what happens when you don't care about the children. Well, I think you care more about the children if you're trying to find out what really happened. And I would feel terrible. Obviously, I feel terrible for any children that died. But I think there's a legitimate question to ask if any of that event was real, if it happened, because all I would say to people is online, watch the helicopter video from that day, which you can find. The official helicopter, they were flying over the alleged crime scene while it was supposedly happening, or shortly after it happened. It looks like a day in the park. There's nothing going on at all. There's no signs of pandemonium, almost no people. And then later you'll see the other scenes of what they call the walking in circles at the firehouse, where you see the people walking, the same people just going over and over again in circles. Like, it made no sense. But these are people on the internet doing it. Those are the real journalists we have out there. The professional journalists are not asking these questions. Instead, they're doing which as you indicated, they're sneering you, saying, well, how dare you? And you have one of the parents, Lenny Posner, out there. I was watching an interview with Wolfgang Halbig recently where he's still fighting that, but so many of these people have to worry about that guy suing them. And I would say to Mr. Posner anyway, hey, look, again, I'm not accusing any. I'm just asking questions. I'm just saying, I'm sorry. We have video of that, and it doesn't look like anything was happening at all. I don't know. There's no signs of an evacuation. There's no signs of anyone going into the school, of ambulances going in. Nothing makes any sense about that. And we see it a little bit differently, but the same thing with the Boston bombing. The late Dave McGowan did great work on that, where they actually do have lots of film of that. And again, just analyzing it made no sense, the way the so-called victims were acting. In many cases, it looked as if the people weren't injured after the blast, and then a little bit later, you see them looking like they're injured. Just many, many questions there. And again, it's not wrong to question these things. You're not disrespecting the victims if there were no victims, or if these things are being engineered for, at the very least, to grab people's guns or whatever, if they have any kind of higher purposes that we may not even understand. So I would urge people, there's nothing wrong with questioning anything. That doesn't mean you're heartless or you don't care about the children. That's for sure.
Before I ask you about your new work, I need to know, is there going to be a Hidden History Part 2 at some point?
The Hidden History 2 is done. It's been done for a while, but the problem is the publishing world. I'm fortunate enough to be able to get anything published, and it's probably not a good time to be a writer because, as we talked about, there are probably fewer readers in the world than there's ever been. People just don't read much anymore. It's almost the older demographic that does. Hidden History 2 will examine the pre-1963 conspiracies and cover-up. Have a lot about Lincoln, a lot about World War II, a lot of stuff that but again, I'm sure it's probably going to be very hard to get published. It's just the Lincoln stuff alone. Lincoln is not one of my favorites, and I try to show the other side of him, and that's going to be hard. But I hope that Skyhorse will publish that. But right now, Survival of the Richest coming out. I have another book that I sent them, which is a little bit different from me. It's called, tentative title is Bully Nation, and it's about bullying and the social hierarchy. It really examines the bullying in schools and how the schools have just really been, I believe, involved in promoting bullies and defending them, and how the social hierarchy works in that. So they have that. I haven't signed a contract, but that's next in the queue. And I kind of sent them the books to them in the order I wrote them. But the process takes so long, and I hope it's not 2 years in between books again. But I certainly have Hidden History 2. I want to get out there at some point. But if it doesn't move faster, it may be that I may have to self-publish that, because I don't know. Again, I hope they've been very courageous in wanting to publish what I've written so far, and they're really one of the few. Them and Trine Day are really the only two publishers. Maybe Farrell House as well. There are really three publishers people like me have to choose from, because we're writing books that go against the grain and go against the establishment, and you got to have a lot of guts for a publisher to take. So my hat's off to Skyhorse for doing that, and hopefully they'll be willing to publish Hidden History too.
Well, I would sure love to read it. So you have a new work that's going to be out soon.
Yes, sir. Survival of the Richest, which is the subtitle is how the corruption of the marketplace and disparity of wealth created the greatest conspiracy of all. And it examines, it's much more focused than Hidden History, because it examines pretty much one subject, and that is how the rich have waged war against us. You talk about class warfare. Well, my thesis is that we've had class warfare waged against us for pretty much all of human history, and it's really being waged at a fever pitch now. And it just examines. It goes over, of course, and it's a lot of statistics in there. Just kind of, and the book was really cut probably almost in half, because it was just. They felt there were just too many examples, too many numbers, and kind of derivative. But it's just amazing what people do not understand the extent of the way wealth has been consolidated in this country over the last, especially 20, 25, 30 years. And it's to the point now where we have close to half of Americans, collectively, close to 50% of the people, have less than 1% of collective wealth. So, at this point, just about half the country has nothing. And you can't have a first world nation when half your country has nothing. They can't buy whatever few products that you're still making in this country, which is almost none, because industry has been completely outsourced. And we'll see if Trump actually brings those factories back. Another thing that was so attractive about him. But we have no industry. We don't make anything. We have what I call the college conspiracy, where college degrees have become completely worthless. And one of the stats I try to focus on in the book that I think will astound people is that 77% of the people in the upper quarter, the top quarter income-wise in America, are college graduates. Only 9% in the lowest quarter are college graduates. It's hard to get a starker contrast than that. And what's even breaking it down even further, the best colleges, there's like 146 colleges are considered the top colleges. If you graduate from one of them, you have a much better chance of getting a real good job. Out of those 146 colleges, only 10% of the graduates come from the bottom half of the population. So 90% of those that are going to the good colleges are coming from the upper half of the country. So there is no upward mobility anymore. There are no Horatio Alger stories, maybe a few in sports, but that's about it. And if anybody wants to get a kind of an advanced look at what's there, I already published a chapter. It was deleted from the published version. It was a long chapter. It's on relations and how, so there's almost no one in the public eye comes from humble circumstances. It's all a myth. Virtually everybody comes from upper middle class, if not wealth. And I've got far too many examples, I guess, for them to want to put in the book on my blog. So it's an interesting chapter, and people get kind of a flavor where I'm going for it, because and it really, that chapter, I think, exemplifies what the original title of the book was, which is You Didn't Build That, because it really shows that almost no one that's super successful in America built that without some kind of assistance, and most often it's because they were born into really good financial circumstances, but I still, I meet a lot of resistance to that, because everybody's so proud of whatever they've done, accomplished, and even if they really, they're struggling too, like most of us are, but they still resent this idea that nobody helped me. Well, first of all, you're not. I wouldn't use you as an example in the book. I'm talking about people that have achieved, really public prominence, in most cases many millions of dollars. My point is to show that they didn't come from nowhere. You may have, worked yourself up a little bit to where, you have a decent life, and I think that's what the book will explore, is how the system, and again, one of Trump's most appealing pieces of rhetoric was that the system is rigged. And I extend it beyond what he was talking about, and I think Survival of the Richest really demonstrates that the system is rigged by the 1% and those slightly below them against all the rest of us.
And when will Survival of the Richest be out?
July 4th is the scheduled publication date, but it can be pre-ordered. I gave an interview on Coast to Coast about it, and the book went through the roof with pre-order sales. It went up to like #1 in international economics on Amazon. So we love to see that. It's got a lot of great blurbs already from people, and both left and right, mostly left, but I was surprised to see like Jerome Corsi and Lou Rockwell, gave it nice blurbs, even though they were, certainly on the right. But it's not a conventional, leftist type of book, although, it's obviously more leftist in nature, but it's populist, and that's what I am. I'm a populist. There's a whole chapter about Huey Long, who's my political hero, and already I got a lot of feedback from the Coast to Coast appearance. We talked a lot about Huey Long. A lot of people didn't realize what his true record was, and I'm hoping a byproduct of the book will be to restore Huey Long's reputation and make people realize what a genuine hero he was.
And we'll have you back on in July to talk about Survival of the Richest if you'd like to come back and join us.
Sure.
And if anyone would like to order Hidden History, there's a special link on MidnightRiderNews.com. And if you want to pre-order Survival of the Richest, there will be a special link on MidnightRiderNews.com in about a week. We hope you'll take advantage of that. If anyone streaming or downloading us right now would like to contact you, how can they do so?
Well, the easiest way, like I said, you can go to my blog. It's called Keeping It Unreal. It's DonaldJeffries.wordpress.com, and you can read that chapter from Survival of the Richest and a lot of my commentary. I write there pretty regularly on current events and sometimes on history or what my upcoming writings might be. And you can comment there. You can leave me. My email is authorjeffries@gmail.com. I welcome emails. I get emails from people, and I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm everywhere. I'm very easy to find on there, so I'm pretty easy to contact if people want to. So, and I welcome questions from readers or interested readers.
And he is Donald Jeffries, the author of Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics. The foreword is by Roger Stone. Buy the book. You can get it through a special link on MidnightRiderNews.com. Thanks, Donald.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm St. Patrick. This is the Midnight Rider News Show, and I'll be right back with some final thoughts.
This is Gary Fannin, author of The Innocence of Oswald. You're listening to my friend, St. Patrick, on the Midnight Rider News Podcast.
When you want an alternative perspective that challenges the way we think, the way we are taught, and the way we believe, go to MidnightRiderNews.com and read the works of St. Patrick, Juliet Toth, and the rest of the Midnight Rider News team. At MidnightRiderNews.com, we speak truth to power, we fight for justice for those who've been treated unjustly, we challenge societal norms, and we always question authority. Please join us at MidnightRiderNews.com today. That's Midnight Writer, WRITER, news.com.
This has been episode 004 of the Midnight Rider News Show, Hidden History, with our guest author, Donald Jeffries, who I would like to thank once again for being on the show. Something Don said tonight has struck me as being absolutely true for years. Regarding secret societies, I've always said that if I know it, it's not that secret. Donald Jeffries and I both see hidden history in much the same way. most of it is not really hidden, and in fact is quite accessible in books, documentaries, articles, and yes, podcasts and radio shows. The history that has been blatantly and purposely ignored by the mainstream journalistic and historical establishment for decades is widely available. So, what does this show? This shows us the immense power that we willingly give to the mainstream mass media and the school textbooks to educate us. For too many, if truth does not slide easily to us through one of these well-controlled channels, then we ignore it either by default, immense laziness, or sadly, satisfied ignorance. Worse yet, if it doesn't come through one of these channels, many will claim it isn't even true. If Dan Rather doesn't believe it, how could it be true? This is also a problem that exists in our classrooms. As education becomes more top-heavy, that is, when the state standards and in some states that the lesson plans come from the state capitals, the power to truly teach and challenge is taken out of the hands of well-educated and well-trained instructors who are the most passionate fans of their own field. By standardizing the human being, the teacher, the education is then rote, stale, and ultimately safe. Safe for the establishment, that is. For you to be active, for you to be a truth seeker, you're going to have to do something that you may not have done before, and something that every college student should be taught how to do. You will have to relearn how to learn. You will have to learn how to discern, how to challenge your own long-held beliefs, and you will have to be open to theories and facts which you may have not been open to in the past. It is then that you will be a student again. It is then that you will be the teacher, and it is then that you will be free. From the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight, I wish you peace.